Hey.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Bold Call, a monthly live stream in which Digiday journalists come together to make big claims about the beats we cover in the media and marketing industries. Today, I'm Tim Peterson, executive editor of video and audio at Digiday Media. And today we've got Seb Joseph, our executive editor of news, as well as Ronan Shields, our senior ad tech reporter. And we're going to talk about all things Google, cookies, a little bit of Chrome, a lot of antitrust. And so first I want to welcome up Seb. Seb, how's it going?
Good, thanks, Tim. Glad to be here. Looking forward to a really interesting discussion.
Yeah, no, we got a lot to discuss, so appreciate you being here as well. And now I'm going to bring in Ronan. Ronan, how's it going?
Hi. Hi, Tim. Hi, Seb. Hi, everybody. Yeah, good to be here. Be interesting to pour over things all in one go. Obviously, we cover them in some quite isolated streams, so it's be good to see how everybody thinks they all fit together.
Yeah, no, and you've been all over this story for years, but especially lately. And for anyone who may be watching and isn't aware, you have the ad tech briefing, which is available to Digiday Plus members. So can you talk a bit about that and how you've been staying on top of the story there?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Great plug. So I guess I use the ad tech briefing. It goes out on Fridays, and it's kind of a bit of a digest of what I've been covering in particular that week, but obviously nothing exists in isolation, as we mentioned. And it's almost like a therapy for myself, if I'm going to be a little bit self-indulgent. And it's where I try to help readers our audience, I should say, read between the lines of what's getting done, drawing things, drawing upon my years of experience reporting on these issues. I know we're about to go into the cookie timeline in a little bit, but yeah, this has been something that I personally have been covering Google and Chrome and cookieless for about 6 years. I was thinking just the other day, but obviously there's some more wider context about that. But yeah, it's kind of helping readers read in between the lines, putting everything together, adding additional insight, maybe even flag posting where our reporting is going as well a little bit.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So speaking of the cookie, so this was supposed to be the year we were going to finally talk about that cookieless future becoming the present. Google decided, nah, not so much. But this has been years in the making and now in the unmaking. Ronan, can you kind of walk us through how we got to this point?
Yeah, certainly. It's up there with the year of mobile, if any of your recollections go back that far. But to my mind, I think this goes back to the mid 2010s when it kind of became apparent that Google and its web browser Chrome would ape its rivals Apple with Safari and Mozilla with its Firefox browser by deprecating third-party cookies. Apple did so very much in keeping with its privacy-first brand that it tries to sell itself to customers on, and then Firefox did likewise. But obviously, the two of those doing it, it's quite small because their market share is a small comparison to Google Chrome, which is about 60+% market share. And I think, Tim, you have a graphic ready to show us where the rubber really hits the road with all things cookie deprecation in Chrome goes. So yeah, as you can see, in January 2020, Google confirmed its plans to deprecate the third-party cookie. At that point in time, they had stipulated a 2022 deadline that it would do it. Obviously, it's probably worth mentioning as well that in the months prior to that, in August 2029, that's what Google Gemini told me anyway, it had announced Privacy Sandbox, which would go in parallel and be precisely that, sandbox or experimenting room for Google and third parties to experiment with online ad targeting measurements without the use of third-party cookies. Then in June 2021, after we got over the initial shock of the pandemic, of course, Google announced there would be a further timeline rolling back the earlier stipulated deadlines by 12 months. That would take us to June 23. Go ahead another 12 months. And we had another timeline delay. And this time Google said it would be delayed to back by another year to 2024. Then in May 2023, Google gave us a bit more meat on the bones, saying that it would start to phase out third-party cookies by the first quarter of last year, which it did, to its credit. And then in July 2024, when it became quite clear that this wasn't working out, and we will get into that later in the conversation, quite the way it had planned, it said, okay, we're not going to we're not going to get rid of third-party cookies by our own volition. Instead, we will offer consumers the choice as to whether or not they want to do away with third-party cookies. At that point, they said they would offer consumers the opportunity to choose by themselves, and this sort of led to the much anticipated Google Chrome consent box, which we've been hearing a lot about in the intervening months. And then at ALM earlier this year, Tim, you were there, Google said it was making progress and they were going to start rolling it out a little bit by bit. At that point in time, anticipation was kind of reaching breaking point. But in April last week, Google said, actually, no, this is proving a little bit difficult. And while Privacy Sandbox would continue, the third-party cookie will also continue. And that caused a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth, I guess a lot of people would say, because there have been 6 years of effort put into this. Tim, I don't know if that's where you want to take it up from here, but that is the timeline as I remember it. We can go over some of the finer details if you want in the coming conversation.
No, that was great, because it's a lot to go through, and it's been a whole roller coaster for everyone, including but definitely not limited to the three of us. So, Rowan, appreciate you running through that. Seb, want to talk with you about so you have been tracking all of this. I mean, you covered that initial announcement back in 2020 that Google was going to deprecate the cookies. You've been evaluating all along the way who are the winners and losers here. You just did a piece on the winners and losers of this reversal. Who are the winners? Who are the losers here?
Well, before I continue, I'd like to caveat anything I say next with a disclaimer. There's a strong chance that these opinions could change in the near future, given how quickly this situation has evolved, as Rose rundown sort of showed. With that out of the way, though, I guess my view is that the big winner kind of here is kind of Google, I feel, insofar as it's now free of something that has been mired in technical complexity for kind of 5 years, right, and has been a source of ridicule kind of for that period too. Moreover, I think it's allowed Google to dodge potential antitrust concerns, right, which looked increasingly likely once it announced it was going to be introducing a consent mechanism at the browser kind of level. We know from some of the conversations we're having at the moment that when that was announced, there was a lot of concern from publishers that this would have taken control away from their own efforts to kind of get consent for third-party tracking via their kind of sites. And I think that in turn could have paved the way for another battle in the courts, right, which Google clearly doesn't need any more of that, given it's already been found to have illegally monopolized the way people access information, but then also how that information is kind of monetized. I think the other kind of big winners here are kind of DSPs, for obvious reason, right? Given third-party cookies are still the main way that most of them frequency cap and control reach, and also then kind of append audience data for targeting. I'd say they were another massive winner. And then you've got the procrastinating kind of marketers, right? The ones that will feel vindicated somewhat by how they slow walked their own preparations. you know, even though third-party cookie tracking is still kind of prohibited in other large-scale browsers, and there's you know, and they aren't even in use on mobile devices powered by like either Android or iOS, right? It's the mobile IDs that facilitate, you know, that cookie kind of role. On the flip side, I think when it comes to losers, again, to stress that this will likely change. Google's reputation has kind of taken a hit, you know, especially the Sandbox team, if the news coming out of kind of possible in Miami to kind of go on. You know, I think there's an argument to be made that retail media networks have also kind of lost one of their favorite kind of talking points, insofar as, you know, people spending more with them because they offer sharper targeting and measurement in the world without third-party cookies. And then I'd also say, you know, and I'm sure we'll sort of talk about this kind of in greater extent, but like to a great extent, sorry, alternative IDs are in a tricky spot, right? I think while they are widely available on a lot of impressions these days, especially, you know, scaled solutions like ID5, UID 2.0 and Ramp ID, they're not necessarily being bought against in any massive scale, right? In part because, you know, for obvious reasons, third-party cookies are still available in Chrome. So for me, it will be interesting to see what happens there. Does that kind of apathy kind of harden or soften over the coming months? I've heard from a couple of sources already that marketers, at least some of them, are committing to more tests of those solutions in the wake of Google's U-turn. But, you know, I'm not sure whether that will kind of amount to anything kind of longer term, you know, especially because, you know, even people at some of these larger alternative ID solutions kind of, you know, they were even expressing their own reservations on the kind of interest that marketers were showing, you know, in these solutions even before Google's reversal was kind of announced. So, you know, I'm in two minds as to whether or not, you know, those solutions will really generate, attract more sort of ad dollars now that this decision has kind of happened. Why would you, if you can you do that on third-party cookies and you build all of your sort of targeting and measurement on the back of that? Now you don't even, there's no urgency to kind of pivot, at least not yet.
Yeah, no, Ron, I guess you and I will get a better view into these things next week when we're at the Digiday Programmatic Marketing Summit in Palm Springs. What are you hearing so far, especially on this alt ID side?
Well, obviously the alt ID providers are, I've spoken to some of them, ID5 in particular. That was an on the record conversation we've published already. I don't know if it's something we can put up in the graphics there, but they're saying like, yeah, their initial pitch has always been third-party cookies were always a hack. They were never originally meant to fulfill the purpose that they eventually evolved into filling. It just kind of, they grew into that prominence almost by accident. And that the value prop that they put forward, which was more secure data, i.e. less data leakage, better audience matching, etc., was better practice. But I think to Seb's point, I think we always have to remember, be very strong in urge in the industry to set and forget. People naturally take the path of least resistance forward. So if you're getting by okay without these new fandangled great technologies, then you just kind of do it, especially in the media market where things are so thin, or profits are such thin margins. Everything is very short-termist in its thinking. I think, yeah, the ID providers have had a big gust of wind taking out of their sales. Seb, I was going to say what you mentioned about the retail media networks potentially being a loser. I think maybe I would look at it slightly like a glass half full, in that at least they had that 5-year window where their marketing message was sorted for them by Google. Google almost took care of it, but yeah, I would say it wouldn't accelerate their rate of growth any further, because I think a lot of people will just say, let's take a pause for a breath, try and catch our breath, and just get some kind of plan forward, as opposed to crisis. That's basically what I'm hearing from the sources I've spoken to over the last week and a half.
you think there's an opportunity for some of those alt ID players, given the macroeconomic sort of climate, like if they're able to show that they deliver better performance than third-party cookies, that advertisers might be more open to kind of shifting to some of those solutions, or at least putting more dollars behind it?
I think the very progressive digital first advertisers, yeah. And just to give you a bit more idea of the kind of advertiser I'm describing, are the kind of ones that would have maybe already dipped their toes of going, in-housing their digital media. The ones that would have explored that, the ones that it's just a bit more intuitive for them to do. I think the larger players, that is the big spending advertisers, the ones that are spending untold amounts of money on a Super Bowl halftime commercial. I think change is hard for such players, and they will be, I'm not saying just happy, but this will probably just bought them a bit more runway to continue as they are. Again, the appetite for disruption is not a lot.
And it seems like, so Seb, you shared this chart with me on just the ID ID presence in the bid stream. Looking at this chart, well, I guess one of the questions I had looking at this chart is, I don't really see UID 2.0. I don't know if TDID v1 would be that. I'm also not sure what pub common is, but like what stands out to me is no ID seems to have such a significant presence that it's like really a universal option.
100%. And I think we'll talk about this more when we're thinking a bit more about like when we're focusing on like what advertisers kind of do next. But it never really, at least to kind of our team, it never seemed like there was ever going to be a one alternative that was going to rise through the ranks to kind of be the universal solution to alternative to third-party cookies. It always felt like it was going to be more of a kind of fragmented sort of proposition there, particularly given the differences in approach to kind of privacy on either side of the Atlantic. And I think this chart is a visual kind of manifestation in that, right? Like you just see it's a very fragmented sort of market in that sort of sense, and there isn't really a clear winner, nor do I think there ever will be in sort of many respects. I think the market will probably coalesce around sort of kind of several solutions in the end.
Of course.
Yeah,
it's just gonna get messier because it hasn't been messy enough.
Yeah, but like that's this industry, right? It kind of misery loves company, as they say.
Right. But it sounds like in that case, like then at least alt IDs will still play some sort of role. Like it's not going to be a complete reversion back to third-party cookie everywhere.
Yeah. No. I think like Ronan will sort of pick up on this as well. But like it feels like they will be, a one aspect of a portfolio-based approach that will kind of span everything from sort of contextual to kind of cohort based to kind of geo to a kind of abundance of different solutions depending on what the advertiser or kind of holdco kind of needs. And then the key thing will be finding the tech that allows you to kind of harmonize all of that, in order to kind of to do the sort of targeting and kind of measurement, at that kind of specific sort of detail. So I think that to me seems like the kind of future. If we're thinking about what comes next after third-party cookies, it's like this, this portfolio-based approach to kind of identity, which I think, to be fair, was already kind of priced in from, when this thing first got announced. That seemed to be where a lot of the smart money and insight was kind of rooted around.
And that seems to like kind of substantiate what also has been the case anyways. Like I feel like all of us have heard from people when we talk about these alternate IDs out there of someone inevitably saying, okay, but how cookieless is this cookieless solution? Really, so many of them are relying on third-party cookies running. Is that
right? Sorry. So you broke up a little bit. Could you repeat that, please?
A lot, like some of these cookieless solutions aren't entirely cookieless, right? So it seems like what Seb's laying out, where third-party cookie plays a role, it almost feels like a continuation of what has been the case.
Yeah, well, obviously, I think there is going to be a federated approach. I think that's probably what it's evolve into. I guess that's probably a better word than muddle along, or maybe a bit more professional sounding one. Yeah, I think a lot of it has been a bit of, there's been cookies sort of sprinkled in there. That's what some people are saying, but that's when you have these vendors sniping about the other ones. So I think, yeah, it's not going to be a complete reversion to the old way, and I don't think it's been a complete sunken cost. The last 6 years, 5 years, half a decade of privacy sandbox development, Google is still insisting that it will move forward with it. For example, the IP diminution or the degradation or deprecation of IP addresses in incognito mode in Google Chrome. That's still on course to happen in Q3 of this year. We're starting, I don't know about you, Seb, but we're starting to hear a little bits of feedback of some of the meetings that Google's privacy sandbox team has been having in Possible down in Miami, which is a conference that's concluding today. And that some people were kind of billing it as almost like an apology tour for the sandbox team, given the timings of everything. A lot of people seem to think that Google's announcement was purposely because everybody was going to congregate down there in Florida this week. That I can't speak to. We just got the announcement and that was about it. I certainly think some of it was probably, some of Google's intentions were probably looking at how Apple fared recently in Europe, being fined by the French competition authorities over its app tracking transparency solution and how it was aimed at. Is that correct, Seb? I saw you nodding your head.
Yeah.
It was a €150 million fine about that, and some of the, I was certainly given the impression that outcome was indicative of where Google's thinking, the Google Chrome team's thinking was coming from.
Well, it's like coming back to sort of Tim's point about some of these alt IDs being kind of essentially third-party cookies in disguise. Was that part of the reason why, like, some publishers were so, at least sort of initially, reticent to kind of back some of those kind of solutions because they just felt like it was history repeating itself essentially, and they had their own sort of solutions that they were looking to stand up anyway.
Yeah, there was that suspicion was there, and then also at the same time we had IAB Tech Lab, very much as the publishing constituency was trying to put forward, I want to say complementary technologies such as seller-defined audiences, which, although I hear it did not have the biggest of uptakes whenever it was initially floated out there again in the sort of 2021, 2022 window. Anecdotally, I've heard that from one or two sources. But yeah, there was a publisher reticence towards it. But then I've also heard that there was no buyers were interested in buying against a publisher-backed solution because it's just like, marking your own homework.
It was also just bad branding, like seller-defined audience. That was the pushback that I heard from buyers. They were just like, we don't want sellers defining the audiences. Like, buyers hate anything that threatens their level of control. Because didn't IAB Tech Lab just recently rebrand seller-defined audiences as curation or curated?
Yeah.
So I want to go back to privacy sandbox because like that seems like the one cookieless solution that is most in question right now. You guys were talking about it a bit. Ronan, you wrote this, so this was last week's ad tech briefing. Can you talk a bit about bit more about where things stand with privacy sandbox? Because it felt like privacy sandbox has been stuck in the mud for the better part of the past year.
Yeah. Okay. So this is where we're going to dovetail with the antitrust conversations that have been ongoing. Obviously, to just lay some further context there for those of you that have just dialed in, so to speak. In April, we had Google lost 2/3 of the ad tech antitrust case. It was ruled to have been illegally tying AdX and DFP Although the judge in that particular case said that the DOJ failed to define an ad network, so that was on one of the three cases Google won, essentially. And then obviously concurrently, we had the following week, we had the remedy phase of the search antitrust case. And I think that's really where we're starting to dovetail with all things privacy sandbox, because in that case, the DOJ is pushing for a forced divestiture of Chrome. And obviously, Chrome sandbox is about all things Chrome. So what sources were telling us was that Google has been intimating that the proposed browser level consent box, where you as a Google Chrome user will be asked, do you want to use third-party cookies, which would have primacy over any publisher URL centric CMP, consent management platform, and that would be screen anti-competitive. I think that's the exact phrase I used in that piece you just flagged, and that was seen as one reason for it saying, hey, actually, you know what? We're just going to have to go back to the drawing board, and cookies can stay in Chrome because that is an open and competitive market. Some of the more conspiratorial voices I've heard over the last week or so has said that's by design. Google is very intentional. None of this was by accident. Google gives you press releases, and then you just have to read into that what you will. And that's it. I think, it kind of makes sense. As one source said to me, Google is just so intentional. It plays 3D chess when the rest are playing checkers. I don't know if it has been designed from the start, but I would imagine the brain trust of Google would have been scenario planning. This happens, that happens. This happens outside of our control, then we can default to this messaging or way of operating. But I think Google is like the house in Vegas. It always wins.
So depressing, man.
I don't know. Do you want to give us a glass half full view on that, Seb? Or do you have
there's no glass half full view on that, man. It's good.
It's interesting because now we're getting to this question of, are we seeing Google in process of exiting open web? So at IAB's annual leadership meeting earlier this year, Jeff Green, CEO of the Trade Desk, was on stage, and he said he thinks Google's going to exit the open web. I was there. I was very skeptical of that claim. Nice for the Trade Desk. I could imagine the Trade Desk would very much love to see Google exit the open web and cede it over to the Trade Desk. But it just felt very far-fetched at the time. Then again, at that time, the idea of Google actually having to divest Chrome seemed pretty far-fetched. Google divesting Google Ads Manager, not so far-fetched even then, but Chrome for sure. And so now, given Google has lost 2 antitrust cases, both that in some ways relate to the open web because of Chrome in the search antitrust case, and then GAM in the ad tech antitrust case, and now Google saying, whatever, y'all keep the third-party cookies. We don't care. We're out of it. This has been a headache for us too. Is this Google actually exiting the open web, or is this me reading tea leaves and it's the wrong kind of tea?
Okay, I'll just get in there first. I would agree with your assessment, Tim. Okay. We look at Google's parent company, Alphabet. It released its earnings last week, and I sat in on that call, and I can't remember the exact numbers. They were good for Google. The one part of the business that was going down was the network business, aka the business formerly known as DoubleClick, aka what's on the table with the ad tech antitrust case. I think they will lose that almost without battering an eyelid. I think, in fact, any such divestiture would be way more traumatic for the rest of the industry, just given how intertwined Google is, than it would be for Google. I think it would be a case of, oh, you want it? Really? You be careful what you wish for. There you go. I think, and I sat in on that particular earnings call, there were no questions about the diminution of the cookie, the deprecation of the cookie. There was no questions about any of the antitrust cases. There was even no questions of it over a potential divestiture of Chrome. That's the headline of any of those things, because many people use it. So I think, yes, it is. I think it's going for YouTube, et cetera, I think the rise in Alphabet's Google Cloud business, I think that's almost like the iceberg on the tip of the horizon here. I think that's the big thing that maybe in 6 years, if we're all still doing a similar, podcast with, a bit more here and a little less up here, we'll be talking about the cloud business and how that could actually be a big part of the strategic play here. That's my take, anyway.
So what do you think?
Yeah, just to kind of echo all of that, really, right? I think at this point, it's hard to see Google's support for the open web as anything but a liability, for that business, a legacy burden that's more trouble than it's worth increasingly, right? The antitrust headaches keep piling up, while the revenues kind of keep sliding. To Rona's point, I think last year, hold on a minute, it raked in 31.2 billion from its ad tech business, tied to the open web, which was down from 32.8 billion in 2022. You look at that, plus the fact that Google has already kind of downward its ad exchange as a peace offering to European kind of regulators. That alone, I think, says kind of plenty about where its priorities lie. And then you pair that with how it squeezed publishers on traffic referrals and the quiet sidelining of search in favor of AI OVVs. And I feel like, and to kind of echo what both of you have said, it's clear Google's open web area is kind of fading in plain sight.
No, got it. Okay. So it feels like, based on this conversation, we have kind of substantiated that claim we make in the headline of Google's letting the industry keep the third-party cookie, but it really does feel like it's just crumbs. And even the open web, in some respects, feels a bit like crumbs these days.
Yeah. Just the ultimate, heads I win, tails you lose sort of situation, I feel like.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, we did get a comment in through LinkedIn, not relevant or not related to this conversation, but Juan LaSalle asked, what's your 2 cents regarding the FTC, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, relaxing from using the term surveillance advertising to just using the term targeted advertising? The FTC's use of the term surveillance advertising had a lot of folks in the industry up in arms. For me, it always felt like I get it, words matter. We are all in the business of words, so words matter. It felt like everything was just overblown. The use of surveillance advertising was overblown. The industry's reaction to the use of surveillance advertising was overblown. There's so much more that it feels like there's to worry about. It never felt like that term surveillance advertising ever really made it beyond the industry or people who care about this stuff. Like I never ran into a family member or a friend who's just like, so you cover surveillance advertising. What do you guys think?
Yeah, go on, Brandon. Go.
Yeah, I'd say, again, back to a lot of people adopt the path of least resistance. And to your point, Tim, is about language. I think a lot of people will be spooked a little bit about surveillance advertising. They can kind of see what you're doing on your device. But when it comes to it, people just want to look at that, the cat video and be like, yeah, okay, all right, yeah. And they'll just kind of, constantly do it. We had the same conversations when GDPR was being brought in, right? There was a lot of people who was like, oh yeah, when you put it to me, it's going to be, no, I don't want, I completely detest that thing. But when you're dangling what people really want, which is that cat video or the sports, the score update in the game or whatever, they'll just go, yeah, okay, all right, we'll worry about the actual fact a little bit later.
So
I think you both kind of nailed it. I think beyond sort of appeasing some of the more sensitive folk in the industry, I don't think the name change does that much really, like in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, because I also don't know how well aware the average person is to kind of some of the risks of the some of the privacy risks that are part of targeted advertising. Like we did a video for Digiday a couple of years ago, but how tied to fingerprinting and how like based on fingerprinting, there was a way for a company to be able to like target government employees, for example, by just being able to triangulate their devices, the IP addresses, like the Wi-Fi they were getting on. So like there is an aspect to targeted advertising that does lend itself towards the term surveillance advertising. At the same time, like there's just never any room for this kind of nuance. So
I also think it's indicative of a bit of a rollback on the sort of momentum that was building on privacy, you know, since kind of GDPR several years ago. You know, you got e-privacy directive, certain proposals to that being rolled back, GDPR being a lot more simplified because it was quite complicated. Everything we talked about with kind of Google, you know, certain kind of concessions being made on fingerprinting. You know, even what like, you know, Apple, the ATT thing in France, it just feels like in some ways you've kind of come full circle, like in many ways now, when you're sort of, it's that kind of JR Dallas thing where you sort of wake up from a dream and it's like, was the last sort of, like, you know, I was like, because like what has actually really changed?
yes.
Like, you know, everything that we've been writing about up and sort of covering up until now, like what, apart from these two kind of antitrust sort of cases, what has there been any kind of real kind of long-term shift from the sort of privacy area that we were in? Like, I feel like that's up for debate, contentious kind of, but I do wonder, and Tim, we've spoken about this since, you know, the start of the year really, but it just feels like we've kind of come full circle in many respects.
Yeah, no, I remember you and I talked in like January after, I think it was after, right before the holidays, Google did that announcement where it was effectively like, hey, everyone, fingerprinting's cool. Like, just keep with fingerprinting. Use IP address, that's cool too. Like, keep going. And you and I were talking, it was just like, is this just the past 5 years getting erased? Like, is this like Avengers?
Yeah. It is like that though, isn't it? Like,
it feels like it.
Yeah.
So, but obviously a lot still to be covering. Before we go, as a thank you to everyone who has been tuning in and who is now very much interested in checking out Ronan's ad tech briefing, you can sign up for a Digiday Plus membership. We are offering a discount code, so you can save 40% on a 3-month Digiday Plus membership by just going to this link, digiday.com/subscribe/exclusive offer. So I'll leave that up on screen for another second. Take your screenshot, whatever it is that you need to do to get that. And with all of that being said, Seb, Ronan, appreciate you guys doing this. Always fun talking.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.